This is LSAT PrepTest 137, Section 1, Passage 3. It is a comparative passage about invasive species. Medium difficulty passage. It's hard because the two passages look like they disagree more than they actually do. Now, both passages are about introduced species, but they're coming at the topic from completely different angles. Passage A is asking how serious is the threat. Passage B is asking whether we're even defining the threat correctly. Now, Passage A starts with history. Elton's 1958 book said disturbed habitats are the ones most vulnerable to new species. That was the old conventional wisdom. Then the passage makes a pivot. New ecologists know that humans introduce species into all kinds of ecosystems, even pristine ones. So the problem is bigger than Elton thought. That is the update. Don't overthink it. Now, the Everglades example takes up a lot of space, but it's doing one job. It shows how an ecosystem that looks wild and natural is actually being reshaped from the inside. Sawgrass dominated, melaleuca trees showed up, grew taller, blocked the light, and changed the soil. The whole system shifted. Then Australia gets one sentence: Scotch broom wiping out native reptiles. And you want to read these examples quickly because they're proof, they're not part of the argument. Your brain should file them under invasion causes real ecological damage and then move on. Now, passage B. This is the passage that really earns the set its difficulty rating. You want to slow down here. The very first sentence reframes everything. The real threat of invasive species isn't against nature, it's against human ideas of what nature is supposed to be. And that word supposed is carrying the whole opening. It tells you the author is thinking the panic is partly a projection. We're upset because nature isn't matching our picture of it. And then comes the argument. Invasion is not zero-sum. New species don't just swap in for old ones. With some critical exceptions, it's positive-sum. Ecosystems can hold more species, not fewer. And ecologists have actually measured this. Local biodiversity can go up after an invasion, and that directly undercuts the alarm in Passage A. But you don't want to read Passage B as a cheerful defense of invasive species. That is a trap. Right near the end, the author says plainly that a few species cause costly damage and tragic extinctions. Now, students either blow past that line or let it distort the whole passage. It is a concession, not a reversal. The author is saying the catastrophic cases are real, but rare. Most plant and animal species just blend in. Now, the last two sentences are the key move for the entire passage set. The author says the real question isn't whether we'll be surrounded by nature, it's what kind of nature we're going to have. That is a philosophical reframing. Passage A assumes there is a correct version of an ecosystem, and invasive species corrupt it. Passage B says that assumption is the problem. Now, here is how the two passages actually relate. Passage A says invasive species cause serious ecological harm, even in places we thought were safe. Passage B says we are misunderstanding what's happening. Ecosystems aren't dying, they're changing. And our discomfort with that change comes from a fixed idea of what natural should look like. Now, they don't flatly contradict each other on the facts. Passage B doesn't deny that melaleuca trees took over the Everglades. What it denies is that took over means destroyed. Passage A frames invasion as destruction. Passage B frames it as transformation. And that one word, destruction versus transformation, is the fault line between these passages. Now, the author's stance trap works like this. Students read Passage B and thinks the author is saying invasive species are fine. But that's too strong. The author is saying the framing of the debate is wrong. There is a difference between invasive species aren't a problem and invasive species aren't the kind of problem we think they are. Passage B is making the second argument. If you flatten it into the first, you're going to pick wrong answers on tone and attitude questions. Now, you want to pay special attention to any question about the word natural. Passage A uses it without thinking twice. The Everglades appears wild and natural. Passage B treats that entire concept as something worth questioning. When a question asks how Passage B's author would respond to language in Passage A, the answer will almost always hinge on this gap. One author takes natural as a given, the other treats it as the thing that needs examining. Before you go on to the questions, you want to check yourself on these three things. First, what does Passage B think is actually wrong with how people talk about invasive species? Second, why does the author of Passage B bring up the fact that biodiversity can increase after invasion? In other words, what work is that doing in the argument? And third, could the author of Passage A accept Passage B's facts and still disagree with Passage B's conclusion?